Hello there. My name is Richard Thieme, again, and I am talking to Don Eijndhoven about Mobius and the issues which it raises, Mobius, a memoir, my novel, but also the issues it raises for Don as a professional and a colleague and a friend. Don is in the Netherlands, and I am in Minneapolis, and it's wonders of technology that lets us talk. So I'm going to introduce Don and let him tell you who he is and what he does, and then we'll get into our conversation. Don, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, Richard. It's always an honor. I am Don. I am an information security professional from the Netherlands. I I was an IT person before I went into security, so I've been doing that for more than 20 years. Um, well, what can I say? I advise the government and various parts of the government and commercial enterprises on the area of information security. Um, I do some things for the MOD, Ministry of Defense. I I think that would pretty much cover what I do and how that related to your book, Richard, because it had me studied.
It's
You
related
had me.
perfectly to the book because you told people what you did without telling anybody what you really do. And that's what Mobius is doing all the time. Uh, you do engage with those areas, but I'm not going to say, well, drill down to get detailed. Tell us what you do,
Well,
because that's not what this is about. That's what Mobius was challenged to deal with his whole life, right?
well, fair enough. In my case, I'm obfuscating because I don't do anything exciting, nothing at all like Mobius. So there's not a whole lot to tell. I just advise companies and governments. That's pretty much it.
Right, and that's what
No,
Mobius does too. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, so I mean, I was. I mean, you already let me in on some Easter eggs with reference to me, and oh, you can check it out and see if you can find them all. And
Yeah.
I was halfway through the book, and I'm like, did this guy crawl in my head? What happened here? It's really really funny. Yeah, yeah.
Well, what was that like? What was that like for you? We're gonna have a general conversation about these issues, and you related to them pretty strongly, I think.
I
Sounds-
did, and mostly because of that sense of futility of even when you want to bring someone in on what your life is like and what occupies your mind and but there's no point because there's no way to relate. I mean, you're two oceans, you're both adrift, and you have no single point of reference. If you want to explain someone what kept you up last night, you'd have to do a whole intro on what it is that you do and how that's relevant and why you do it and what motivates you. And and because if you don't, they'd be even more lost than if
Right.
you would try to ramble on through your life, basically. And so yeah, that really touched something on with me. Yeah.
Well, a number of people have said that because Penny, people keep asking my wife, "Are you Penny?" And no, she's not Penny, but there are pennies, and you'd be surprised, or maybe not, at how many people have written to say, "Let me tell you about my own penny," and it
Yeah.
ranges from casual to the last one from someone at NSA was for same duration. There's 37 years for Mobius, for about 40 for him to touch base with his penny. And I think it also touches something in our psyches, right? That we need someone to touch base with. There's so much isolation in the work of intelligence and security, and yet if we remain within that bubble, people really, it's like being a chess master, right? Or they go crazy, some of them. Uh,
I imagine so. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've not. I understood the role of Penny. That emotional anchor that you just described. I mean, it keeps you human. It keeps you in touch somewhat. I've been fortunate enough to meet someone that is much closer to me than Penny is to Mobius,
yeah,
and that is much more sane, I think,
yeah,
than Penny is in the book.
yeah,
And I mean, it's really funny how you captured the, how should I put this, the futility of permutations, that mental processes that people go through.
right,
The whole relationship dynamic and how people can basically I don't know, muddy themselves through life on a romantic endeavor that never really fulfills them. And how you can really see very different worlds colliding whenever they meet. This huge rift, this huge disconnect that I found really interesting. Yeah.
That's a very good way to put it. In my conversation with Jennifer Granick, she said, really, that relationship is all relationships.
Yeah.
Everybody is tasked with how much of who I am do I know? How much can I reveal? And how much can the relationship handle uh, comfortably? How elastic is it? And will it bend but not break? And my dedication in the book is to Shirley, who always knew who I was. And I meant that on every possible level. There is not any aspect of my life, including the areas where I'm not most proud um, or most proud of, that wasn't fully disclosed because that was necessary in order for her, uh, well, to know who I was, but to be able to accept and love who I was. And Penny, of course, couldn't do that. And that's the dilemma I run into in this conversation last night that I had with a forum of security professionals about UFOs, which I'm speaking to again at DEF CON by their request in about 2 weeks. They wanted an update given the current discussion that's going on in this country, at any rate, about the government report and the admission of UFOs. And we discussed how it puts you, UFOs, security, intelligence, and you name it, the things I've pursued put you into a place uh, where you increasingly are distant from people who inhabit what I call the consensus reality. Mobius calls them humplings. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
is,
Nice reference from earlier books, by the way.
yeah, yeah. Mobius read every one. Mobius read everything I wrote. He liked some of it, uh, being who he was. But at some point in my life, when I was addressing these issues in speeches, I do often hear someone say, I don't want to know that. I don't want
Yeah.
to live in your world. I had somebody respond to one of those talks by saying, you see an alien behind every tree and a spy and a liar in every government post. And while that may be close to true, um, he doesn't want to know. He didn't want to know. And I was simply telling the basic truth about what I've discovered. And increasingly, it does alienate you from those who want the more comforting consensus uh,
Oh, yeah.
with which
Absolutely.
they can align. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
you really you really touched on that when you made Mobius, attempt it with Penny. That he said, okay, now I need to just try to make you understand, and that really touched me because I once snapped in a similar way, although
Yeah.
less emotionally traumatic, at a family dinner with an ex-girlfriend years ago, and one of them was, I don't know what got into me, to be honest. He asked me, so what's the worst that you've seen? And for some reason that got me agitated. I said, what's your frame of reference? I
Right.
mean,
That's
what
right.
would you consider worse? A fully grown man raping a 6 months old baby,
Yeah.
or a guy throwing a gay guy off a wall,
Yeah.
NIS? You know, the filth that you're exposed to in some areas of life, which I'm fortunately out of, and have been for a while. What's your frame of reference? I mean,
Right.
I almost have to laugh. Like the whole concept was really upturned, and I went way too far in explaining that, and the whole table was just fell silent, and the mood was ruined. And
Nobody
that
knows.
was the end of
Right.
that dinner.
Right. The happy-go-lucky, here's to life vibe
Yeah,
is gone. Right.
yeah, and I never attempted that again. That really made me realize that I saw the same looks that described, like, dude, I didn't want to know that, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
you're
Right.
puncturing a bubble. It's clearly noticeable. Yeah.
And one of our defense mechanisms, which I learned in my family of origin, Mobius's autobiographical discussion of his family overlapped to a striking degree with my own. And you learn to dissociate, and you just go into your place. Now, I wasn't abused the way I hear people tell me the things to which you're referring, horrific abuse. Uh, and I do know from interrogators that when they're torturing someone, they try to be very careful not to drive them past a certain point, because there's a point at which the pain becomes a point of light and drives them into ecstasy. And if you look
Yeah.
at Greco pictures of martyrs, the paintings of martyrs that he did, you can see this radiant light shining from their eyes, and it's not invented.
You
It's
think that's a
it's a
reference to
fact.
that?
You go to a different part of your psyche, and
Yeah,
you
yeah.
are flooded with literally ecstasy. And you don't want to drive someone there when the pain is your leverage over them. But we also know, as Mobius learned in those torture sessions on that base in Poland, that torture is not the best way to get truthful information from someone, because
Yeah.
you'll say anything to make it stop, and you just try to figure out what it is they want to know from you. You'll sign any document, you'll make up anything. But I was talking about dissociation, which people questioned me about his degree of rationalization.
Mhm.
They thought he was a hypocrite, somebody said. Um, and I don't think he was a hypocrite at all. I think he was a human trying to figure out how to manage his psyche, and distancing himself from it until it became overwhelming. Was what we all do. And I was talking to a therapist about my own um, gift, because I think it's a feature, not a bug, to be able to dissociate now. And he
Yeah,
said, as
yeah.
long as you can come back, if you know how to go there and you know how to come back, and that's very much like a shaman as well. I learned that in the ministry, that there are other worlds, and your job as a shaman or a priest is to go into them and inhabit them, but know how to return to the consensus reality of the people to whom you're speaking. Uh,
Yeah.
or else you are literally judged appropriately to be insane, because your point of reference is now a hallucinatory
Yeah.
pageantry, that you're the only one there. You're the only one inhabiting, and we're
Yeah.
wearing this clothing, you know?
I, I noticed that you in that book you took several behaviors or how should I put that, devices that people employ in this fashion, and this disassociation and the rationalization and that sense of futility of walking a higher path, is
Yeah.
like, yeah, sure, we see it, but fuck it, there's no sense in trying to walk that, because either you can't, or you'll bump into yourself later, or yeah, I found that very interesting as well, that you covered that really, 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 really well. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking right now of the fact that I'm moving into another book, another Mobius book, um, in which he is revealing his real name, but of course that isn't true either.
Does he even know? Yeah.
He finally reveals to Penny that his name is Divor, which is a Eastern European name. But actually, what he's doing is taking his surname, which is Dvorkian, uh, and lying about it again. It,
Yeah.
uh, but the way the book begins, the exhilaration with which it kind of ends, although there's despair and exhilaration together, uh, he is exhilarated at being free at last, and
Mm.
getting through it, and uh, beginning to own himself once again. And it's kind of like any addiction. If someone gets free of what it is, there's an initial exhilaration, but then there's backsliding. Uh,
Mm.
you get depressed, and when he grasps how much he gave up and how much his life changed, that exhilaration fades, and he finds himself really, really depressed, and he backslides in a different way that I won't give away. But some of those old behaviors return, because it's all he knows how to do, and,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
and he applies himself in a different way with a different focus. But it's I think it's going to be a pretty cool narrative. Um, and what happens is you start to hear these voices. I heard Mobius, reflecting on
Mm.
um, what was happening, and and then suddenly I knew the creative process was alive again. And you can go to sleep at night and say, "Remember where you left off." And when I wrote Mobius, I woke up every morning knowing where to begin, where to go, because my unconscious worked on it through the night. So I've learned to treat my consciousness and my unconscious consciousness as an ally, and
Yeah.
and to use it and use it, but you can't control it. I mean, you're reading, it's the horse, and you're in the saddle, but the horse is in charge, right?
Yeah, it's
You,
going.
you got to go the direction the horse is galloping.
Yeah.
You-
So I wonder if you're going to go the way of George Martin with killing off the characters and all that. Might happen. Do you think that Mobius will realize that the thing is doing is rationalizing in order to survive? That it's like a survival mechanism to stay mentally somewhat sane? Or-
I think his predilection, like mine, is to be supremely conscious. But I
Hmm.
sometimes wish I was as dumb as a box of rocks, felt little, had no empathy, and understood nobody.
No.
Because so many people seem to caroom like a pinball from flipper to flipper through life, grinning, grinning without any awareness of what they're missing because they never had it and don't know about it. And sometimes, when I look at my age and how it's increasing, because every day it gets one more day, I think, well, I'll get to that stage where I will forget everything and
Is that
know
that's
nothing.
probably the most cynical version of the saying that ignorance is bliss, right?
Yeah,
You
right,
know.
right, right. And I don't know that it is because your psyche, it's not just that simple. But I do know, Don, that when I wrote that last paragraph, I was surprised to say it. It came out just right like it is in the book. And when you're in a creative mode, it is like a muse. I understand where the concept of muse came from because it's like the prefrontal cortex conscious part is watching the unconscious creative part do this work. And it's like you watch those words come, and you could have the illusion that they're coming from somewhere else, which is a danger to pursue. Automatic writing, which I tried to do in my youth, and I found that's a dangerous pursuit because you can isolate your unconscious processes and demonize them, literally turn them into demons.
No,
But
I believe so.
that,
Yeah.
that last paragraph about the ashes of our short lives blowing through the air and falling onto the landscape we inhabit in a trance, heading for the edge of night. I read that and I thought, oh, that can't be true. But
Let's hope not.
well, let's hope not. But what's left us then? And that's the world of Mobius really is the contained world of Earth now, here and now. And there's no afterlife. There's nothing to come beyond this. And I remember being struck when Roger Ebert, the film critic, was dying, literally. And he said, I have no fear of death because I wasn't here before I was born and didn't miss it. And I won't be
Mhm.
here after I'm dead and I won't miss it. I just
Yeah.
won't be. And there's a part of me that gets chilled, even thinking those things. But we've been with death so much in our lives, especially in the ministry. And in one of my early islands in the clickstream, I said, you carry your questions to the grave, but ultimately the questions become their own answers. The silence of the grave becomes its own answer. Um,
Perhaps its own appeal as well.
yeah, yeah. So coming to terms with those things and just living in the here and now. Some people don't even think about these questions, but when you're hyper conscious, it's like a Dostoevsky hero. You gnaw at yourself in your hyper awareness
Mm.
of what's real, and you strike me as the kind of guy who might have a little of that. You're pretty conscious and aware, wouldn't you say?
Well, I try to be. I mean, it's just this is an effort that I've been developing the last couple of years. After noticing that I've really basically ignored the whole emotional side of myself. The whole how should I put that emotional social development aspect of life,
Really?
the social skills in the broadest sense, and it's brought me many things. I mean, I don't know if I'm hypersensitive like you or hyper aware. I wish I hope to be. I aim to be, but yeah, I mean, I thought the entire ending of your book was so depressingly realistic that I almost hoped that you'd put a more optimistic spin on it. And I wondered if Edward Snowden went through the emotions that you described, because it sounded like a narrative of his current life, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I've never talked to him. It probably wouldn't be a bad idea. My hunch, from what I've seen of his public persona, is that his necessary arrogance, which is a defense mechanism
mm,
against knowing that he, like all of us, we have no justification for arrogance in the human sphere. But arrogance is usually a mask for our deep insecurity or unhappiness. And unless that mask breaks or goes, unless you let go of that defense mechanism, you don't know what Mobius was willing to feel it and go all the way through. Snowden, you might expect that to be the trajectory of whistleblowers, and I have talked to other whistleblowers, and indeed, uh, some of those things he says are direct quotes from people who said, "I gave up everything." And
I believe that's really true, and that's very literal. I think that he put the torch to his entire life, and if he would now, I mean, he never struck me as arrogant. I mean, he must have had some kind of God complex to do what he
oh yeah,
was,
oh
what he
yeah,
did, right?
yeah.
And I wonder if you could truly know what you're getting into ever, you know, if you do something on that scale. But
I don't think you do. I don't think you
I
do.
don't think that's possible. No.
And it's again, like so many of the statements or incidents in the book, they're based on reality. And it was a dear
Yeah,
friend who
definitely.
works for one of the agencies who posed the question that Mobius himself poses. But those were his words at a critical moment in his career and his life. What do you do if you've made a pact with the devil and you don't discover it until long after you've signed?
Yeah.
And that is not an unusual trajectory for people, not only in the intelligence community, but in certain particular ways of making a living. You can't know what you're getting into, right?
Yeah.
Because
Even when you're outright told, like Faust, you know, I mean, you know what you're getting into because the people just tell you, but they know you won't comprehend. You know, it's
no,
still it's way
no,
too. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just no, no. You don't haven't arrived at that moment where you say, "Oh, oh, I see.
Yeah.
This is what. Oh, this is what you meant. I see."
And
Uh,
that's one of those things that really took me by your book as well, because basically that's what happens constantly in the book. No, you'll realize down the road. No, you'll realize then. You know,
yeah,
and that really does happen. It doesn't mean anything in the beginning, and
right.
it
And
only partially means something down the road. It's an ever evolving puzzle, basically.
yeah, and the way he began, which is not was not uncommon prior to 9/11. Then people start lining up to join the intelligence
Oh
community. The
yeah,
whole culture changed, but it was not uncommon for a professor or other person who had observed you at length to say, I have an interesting person I'd like you to meet. And as he says, a fork in the road becomes a single path, one edge, like a Mobius strip, and you're down it, and before you know it, you say, "Oh, that sounds cool," and oh, this is joining the elite. Um, and I'm trying to remember which one it was who said, "There's no high greater than secrets." I mean, and Mobius says that it's better than sex. He said, depending on the sex and depending on the secrets, but
fair enough. Yes.
uh, yeah. But where you wind up, and I think this might have been Ellsberg who said this. He said, you can't know the isolation afterward. It's like you've been going to all these wonderful Georgetown parties with all your friends and colleagues, and suddenly
Yeah.
you find yourself out on the porch, your nose to the cold glass, looking at all your former colleagues having a good time, drinking and chattering away, and then they all turn their back on you and go off into the dining room to eat, and you're left alone and
Yeah.
excluded. And yet, would you do it again? Uh, I knew someone at the Department of Energy who blew the whistle on safety concerns. There were real issues for him, and 3 times he did it. And he said people would come up to him and say, "Thank you so much for doing that." They'd say, "I couldn't do that because I have a family, or I have this, or I have that."
Yeah.
And they all had reasons why they couldn't do it. And he says, and they're right. He says, if I had
Yeah.
it to do over again, I don't think I would do it because of what they did to me as a result of
Yeah.
just trying to save lives and keep us safe at our work. And coming to
Yeah.
terms with the venality of people and their disregard for human life and their willingness to throw you under the bus to protect what they perceive as their advantage.
Yeah.
Seems endless. I don't. I hope I don't sound cynical, but I think it's a realistic view of what I've observed and what wins. I'm reading Cy Hirsch's book on the Kennedys. It might be extreme, but it's The Dark Side of Camelot. And
Mm.
it struck me that if you took Donald Trump's name and put it into the Kennedy family, you would have the identical narrative. All these things that people excoriate in Trump,
Yeah.
they all were, from Joe down to Bobby and Jack and Teddy, all all just as bad in all the same ways, not some, but across the board, starting with the Joe's work in the mob. He was mobbed up, and the Kennedys made deals with the mob, and the mob delivered critical pieces of the election in Illinois and West Virginia and elsewhere, and then was enlisted to try to kill Castro, which is almost like, the vengeance Trump wants for people on people. Kennedy's felt that way about Castro. There was no real strategic
Mm.
reason. I mean, he lived to the end of his life for decades, and so what?
Yeah.
So what?
What a-
There was
yeah.
no strategic reason, and a lot of people around the Kennedys saw that, but nobody could interfere with that obsession with trying to kill him because he besmirched the family name with the Bay of Pigs. Because the family, that's the
Yeah.
name,
Yeah.
that's what matters. So once we've seen that, and we've seen the kind of tortures that Mobius described, people say, "Oh, no, that's real." People have no idea what one human being does to another in the name of security and defense, uh, even when that other person is absolutely innocent.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that's, if you're talking about, the burden of, you know, working in that field, I think that's probably the most crucial difference is that we do know exactly how deep that rabbit hole is, and it's shocking. It always is for everyone. I don't think anyone can evade
Yeah.
that one ultimate truth is that there really is no depth that people would go to get what they want and to excuse away their behaviors and their methods. And yeah, I mean, that I think that is perhaps the single one truth that isolates you completely from the rest of society. And you can take glory in that, say, take some kind of take it as a badge of pride.
Right. Right.
Look at me taking all this punishment to do what's right, and to keep the state healthy and all that. But who are you really kidding? And
Well,
yeah, I think that the deepest of human tragedies are built on that.
I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely. Let me take this in the direction of a current event, which is Pegasus being revealed to have penetrated Apple, security, and sold itself. Now, let me preface this by saying I know people who theoretically say they're white hat hackers and doing the right thing, but I've known them to sell 0 days to brokers who in turn sell them to the worst people in the world to use for surveillance, to arrest people, to torture people, to kill people. Just as Pegasus seems to have been used by some of the most nefarious actors in the world. And yet you have a public statement by the head of the company. What is his name? Holio? I think of Beavis and Butthead, with a name like Holio, but he
Well,
became
that's
very
nice.
angry, and this is the justification you get. And he came out with it. He said, "We did this to save lives." He said, "We don't want people to use it for the wrong things. We hope they don't. We'll stop them if we can when we find out they do," which is at best an evasion. But he also said, "We have used this on behalf of the security services, and other countries have as well, to interrupt terrorist plots. And it's a good thing that we have this." And he said, "People who don't work in this area have no idea what it takes to keep you safe. And Mobius sounds that theme a
Yeah.
lot. So we do this
Sure. Yeah.
on the edges of empire, stepping through bloody guts, so you can wake up in the same world in which you went to sleep last night and not
Yeah.
even think about it. And if
Yeah.
we didn't do it, yeah, there's always an Archelian battle cruiser hanging off the earth, ready to destroy it. But we're the ones who keep you safe.
Yeah.
So what do you
And of
what do
course,
you think of that?
you can always be casted by Jack Nicholson and give that ranty speech of A
Yeah,
Few Good Men, I think it was.
yeah,
Don't you dare to question the security I provide.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
yeah. Like
yeah.
again, who are
Is
you
that an
kidding?
occupational hazard? Do you think of security work? Because I don't know how the dual use nature of tools like Pegasus and all the other tools that good guys in the UK and Western Europe and the US, the world we think of as the quote unquote civilized world, make all these tools and sell
Yeah.
them to all the bad guys in the darker climes of our environment, so called.
I think if that entire notion of dual use, we should just put that away because it's not dual use. It's used for one purpose. It depends on who's using it, like a gun, right?
Exactly.
It's fine until you shoot the wrong guy, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so
Exactly.
let's do away with that whole theme. And um, I mean, if prohibiting that kind of behaviors would work, then embargoes would work, and embargoes have never really worked. They're
Right.
and perhaps if you take the long view, they're not intended to. I think it was Bruce Schneier in that book, Data and Goliath, that he says, whistleblowers are the protective measures that keep democracies honest. I think that's both true and wholly naive, but it's in the same artery of basic truths here. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, this was entirely expected. I mean, if you think that if you can imagine someone doing this, then someone is doing it. That's basically the truth ever since internet was developed.
That's right.
There's always going to be someone that's going to do it, even if you don't want it to.
Right. That's right. And when I talk to people in the intelligence community, it's especially in areas like bio, which has been a source
Sure.
of alarm for people long before this current pandemic, because they knew what people could do. And somebody asked me what kept me up at night, and I said it's talking to a technologist at CIA who said he couldn't sleep. That's what kept me up, and he couldn't
Yeah.
sleep because of bio. And it's the people I've talked to at CIA about that. It's not. It's not state actors per se only, but the alliances of state actors with non-state actors, and the independence of some non-state actors who will literally do what they can. And the reason it was thinkable, I'm not saying the Chinese engineered the virus and did it as a test case, but that it is thinkable that they allowed it to persist as a pandemic in order to see what happened.
Hmm.
Uh, because losing 50, 100,000 people, a million people. I remember Mao Zedong said, bring it on about nuclear
Yeah.
war. He says, we could lose a million, 2 million, and come
Yeah.
up smiling. You can't. So we'll go underground. We'll come back. We're a
Yeah.
long lived civilization. And I
Yeah.
I remember sitting in Spain when I was 21 years old with a Spaniard at a restaurant, El Santuario in Madrid, and he said, America's it's a great country, but it's a very young country. And I said,
Yeah.
got it. We're
Yeah.
living there with the Guardia Civil on the streets and Franco in power, and a million dead from the Civil War and Guernica and all the rest of it. And you just get a sense of what he had lived through.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, we don't want to be naive. And I agree with you that Schneier's view on that is self-serving. It's to believe he's doing something useful himself by being a
Yeah.
security guy.
I think when it comes down to it, all of it is basically a way to excuse it to yourself, right? It's either you take the um, I was only following orders kind of approach, to defend yourself, or your whistleblowing, and because you can't stand it anymore. But really, at the end of that whole trip,
Yeah.
really that different,
Yeah.
defending it or raging against it. I mean,
Well,
we all do it to live with ourselves and to look into the mirror every morning and
right.
you know
And do you think it's good then to sometimes just pop into a lightness, a blitheness of spirit? I'm thinking of a scene in the movie of Tom Jones. I'd read the book, but in the movie, there's a scene toward the end where it turns out that um, the woman Tom has, one of the women Tom has been sleeping with, turns out to have been his actual mother, I guess it was. And there's the expression on her face as she grasps that she might have just had sex with her son, and then it changes, and it's just like, oh well, what the hell? And the whole burden of any kind of evil act or sinfulness, or however you want to phrase it, that's not the same as what we're talking about. But I'll never forget. She just said she had this wonderful smile of acceptance,
mm.
and I wonder if that's maybe a worthwhile goal for Mobius to head toward, and all of us to head toward, in order to shirk the burden of consciousness of what we have
Exactly,
done or left undone, to
yeah.
just
That's
own
exactly
up.
what it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, whistleblowing is just another way to shed that skin of guilt, and
right.
so is defending it in an open court, or whatever avenue you want to take. That's what we're looking for. I think redemption is, if not to the world, then at least to ourselves. And yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of ways to rationalize things, and you can take it any direction that you want. I totally understand what you just that scene. I understand it. I mean, if you're at rock bottom,
Yeah,
in whatever way, then you have two options. It's either you deal with it, or you leave this planet.
yes.
If you lollop off this mortal coil and be done with it,
That's right.
yeah, and you do what you have to do, and
Yeah, and life
yeah,
is rich.
you know,
Life, nevertheless, with all its hodgepodge of mixed motives and mixed activities,
yeah,
it's rich and delicious. Is it not?
indeed, yeah.
And
Been,
Mobius
I've been,
hasn't come to that yet, but I think in the second book, he will have moments of just
mm,
recognizing that regardless of what we have done and left undone, isn't this a great ride? And somebody reviewing Mobius characterized it that way. They said, what a great ride." But
Hunter Thompson, right?
yeah, before we wind down, do you have any specific questions or concerns or issues that you wanted to raise about the book, uh, that I might address or we might address?
Hmm. Good question. Well, I mean, I think I'm far from the only one that wants to find out how that whole story of Mobius ends. Once he deal with himself, and how does he look at himself when it's all done? When he's gone through all the way down that rabbit hole, and if he can pick up a life, and how realistic that is. I think in this day and age, it's anyone's guess. I mean, you could openly take Snowden as an example. Do you ever think he'll have a normal life in any sense of the word that we would recognize as such? And I think that's really interesting. If you take Mobius's trip in that
Yeah,
direction as well. I mean, I don't know how old he is at the end of the book, Richard.
he's in
I
his
mean,
50s, late
in
50s.
he's got some years to go then yet.
I would
And
say, let's see, he met Penny when he was, say, let's say 18, 37 years. So yeah, yeah, mid to late 50s.
he's
So
not done yet. And,
no, no, he is not done yet. And he's not going to ever get back into government work. They're never going to give him a second chance. But but there are other
mm.
ways to do the work. And
Oh yeah, yeah, the gray work. Yeah, yeah.
I'm thinking of an FBI guy who said years ago. He says, you can have one big brother or a lot of little brothers and choose wisely. And then years later, he said, well, that was a wrong way to say it. You've got big brother and little brothers all over. You've got
Yeah,
good, all the rest of it. When you look at what the Chinese are doing, I recently read, we have been harmonized about the extraordinary degree of using technology for social control that is going on in China. And then I realized all the techniques are in essence the same as getting likes on Facebook. So you get points from the government, and without enough points, you don't get on the bus or you don't get a job. And if you don't get enough likes, people have killed themselves over not getting enough likes. It's the same dynamic, administered intelligently and carefully by a social media platform, whether it's the Chinese government doing it or whether it's all the little brothers that have seduced and sucked in people to go for false rewards. So anyway, there are a lot of little brothers, and they include people who will use the tools and techniques of espionage and intelligence work to penetrate, for example, a corporation they believe is worthy of pursuit because of,
Yeah.
and that means any corporation with income over $1,000 a year, right? So,
Basically everyone. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I think that you already captured a possible avenue is when you say, I mean, you covered this in the book already, that there's no real difference between, one three-letter agency and the other one, and they're all completely intermingled. And the truth is that the whole commercial enterprise and the government work is all one big ball, right? So
that's right.
we call it government, we call it private sector, but there really is no distinction. And what would be funny and all too realistic if he would just be drawn back into certain behaviors, then find the new way in through the commercial sector,
Right.
and then himself in the same old hall of mirrors that he grew up in and go, fuck, I'm here again,
Yep.
and not being able to quit it even if he wants to, and
Well, you just nailed one of the major themes of the second book.
all too realistic. Definitely.
Absolutely. It's where it's headed. And the way you just said that too, it's great. Call it government. This is part of the great self-deception which society does on itself in order to believe these things are really distinct, right? It's like saying,
Again,
I don't work for NSA anymore, I'm a contractor.
Yeah.
It's not even two
I mean,
sides of the same coin. It's one side.
and why would any government agency that does that clearly has no morals or uses that as a parlor trick, then why would they object to letting him in? Because the whole moral thing doesn't even apply.
That's right. That's right. And giving names to things. Look, I was in religion. Religion is organized. Religion is in part giving names to things that compartmentalize and comfort the people. They don't come for challenge or transformation. They come for comfort and ease, and to shed their sins. And that's why, you say the confession every week, but you shouldn't need to say it every week if it worked, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Pardon only and not for certain. So I think the bottom line, though, is we can talk about all these things, but what a pleasure it is to be sitting in your garden on a summer afternoon, seeing you and talking to you again after all the privations of COVID time. I'm afraid I'm getting so used to Zoom that this is what's real. And if I saw you in the flesh, I would doubt my own eyes and senses. But God willing, I will again. Thank you so much for having this conversation. It's terrific to see you. It's terrific to talk to you. And God willing, I will be back in Amsterdam. I think I've made 8 different speeches at different times in The Hague and Rotterdam, Amsterdam, and I love it. It's a second home. You're an important part of it. You played a role that you didn't sign up for. I remember when I found out one morning in Amsterdam that my brother had died, and you drove through all that horrendous traffic to have dinner. And we didn't need to talk about anything major. It was your presence over that plate of spaghetti and talking and just being with that I will never forget. So you have been a good and wonderful and true friend and a great colleague. And I'll see you and your beautiful lady again, God willing.
I certainly do hope so, and it's entirely likewise. I mean, again, nothing I did is in any way special. You just do that, and never even entered my mind to do anything different. And I love your company. I hope to see you back whole and healthy. And I hope your wife as well. Give her my regards.
I will. And yeah, you said it. You didn't give it a thought, and that's who you are. So
Well,
thanks for being my friend, eh?
hey, that's much reward has been given in
Okay.
our friendship.
Big
So,
hug, elbow bump.
I hope take care
See
of yourself,
you,
man.
I hope. Take care. Thank you.
Bye bye.